Welcome to the Center Events Task Force presentation on Baha'i Heroes and Heroines series. And today the presentation will be on Thomas Breakwell. Please make sure that you are muted and please hold your questions until after the presentation. Not so long ago, in 1983, in Key West, Florida, a young man was invited by a Navy friend to a Baha'i fireside. The host gave him a Baha'i prayer book as a gift at the end of the fireside. When the young man returned to his military base in Florida, he opened the book and read the long obligatory prayer written by Baha'u'llah, which Baha'is recite each day. He was so moved by the words that he decided to recite the prayer daily and did so for a month. At the end of that period, he was invited by the same friend to attend a Baha'i Nowruz, or New Year celebration. This was a most joyous, uplifting celebration, and the words of the speakers heightened the young man's interest in the faith. When one of the attendees asked him if he was ready to become a Baha'i, without much thought, without any hesitation, he said yes, and he enrolled as a Baha'i. He has been a Baha'i ever since, that's for about 38 years, and has served in various local spiritual assemblies. This young man at that time served in the US Navy as a linguist, cryptanalyst, in Korean and Spanish for Navy intelligence. And he was then stationed in South Dade, Miami, Florida. Subsequently, he worked as an intelligence analyst for the Center for Naval Analysis in Rosslyn, Arlington, and Arlington, Virginia. A lawyer by profession, he graduated from George Mason University School of Law and has over 40 years of experience in the federal acquisition and contracting fields, both in government as well as the private sector. Currently, he resides in the town of Vienna, Virginia, with his wife Yasmin and his two children, Sean and Lydia. Dear friends, it is a pleasure and an honor for me to present Mr. John Russo, our speaker for this evening. John?
Thank you. Fuman, were you going to say an opening prayer?
Yes, thank you, John.
Okay. Sure.
So we're starting the program for John's presentation this evening with an opening prayer from Baha'u'llah. I beseech thee by thy name that has unlocked the gates of heaven and filled with ecstasy the concourse on high, to enable me to serve thee in this day and to strengthen me to observe that which thou didst prescribe in thy book. Thou knowest, O my Lord, what is in me, but I know not what is in thee. Thou art the all-knowing, the all-informed. Baha'u'llah.
Thank you. Back in September 2019, the events committee of the Northern Virginia Baha'i Center gave me the opportunity to make a presentation on the life of Lua Getzinger as part of what was intended to be a series called Baha'i Heroines and Heroes and Heroines. The intention was that it would be a recurring presentation, but events interceded and followed by the pandemic and everything else that followed. And it was any recurrence of the series was delayed. So I want to thank the events committee for giving me this opportunity to resume the series and to focus on another very famous Baha'i, Mr. Thomas Breakwell. I'm going to share the screen with everyone. Thomas Brakewell had a very brief life, as you can see from his birth of May 31st, 1872, and his passing on June 13th, 1902. I like the quote, and it's very relevant, as this gentleman had such a pure faith, an instant faith in the Baha'i Faith and in Abdul Baha and Baha'u'llah, that it didn't take him long to accept the faith. The quote is, "As ye have faith, so shall your powers and blessings be. This is the balance, this is the balance, this is the balance." A quote from Abdul Baha, the center of the covenant, the master, the eldest son of Baha'u'llah, prophet, founder of the faith, and the perfect exemplar of the faith. In that presentation on the life of Louis Getzinger, I shared this quote, which exemplifies what makes the early Baha'is the true Baha'i heroines and heroes, who they are, and points out their significance. This is from a book by Janet Russo called A Love Which Does Not Wait. It reads, "They had varying degrees of education, different levels of intellectual attainment. They died far from home while working with one common purpose, to establish the Baha'i reality of peace through unity among all people. Within this purpose, they shared a rare attribute which enabled them to do their work under the most adverse conditions with incomparable grace. They were transformed and animated by a love which does not wait, but rushes forth to serve, unburdened by expectation of reward, unfreighted with selfish concerns. They were truly Baha'is, followers of Baha'u'llah, light bearers. The source of their light may have seemed obscure to much of the world, but to them, it was as apparent as the sun." So I think it's a beautiful quote, and it applies to many of the people who really connected the West to the faith through visitations to Akka and meeting with Abdul Baha and following up to promote the faith in their respective countries, like Louis Getzinger, like Thomas Breakwell. Now, much of this presentation is derived from this book by Rajwanti Lakshman Lepan, a female. This is the definitive biography on the life of Brakewell. It's only 80 pages, but it's packed with such spirit and such insight that if you're gonna read it, you're not gonna put it down. You're gonna start it, and you're just gonna continue through to the very end. So much of what I've included in this slide presentation comes from Lakshman Lepan. I've added to the presentation insights from May Bowles' personal account of her relationship with Thomas Breakwell and other secondary sources, anecdotal information that I've gotten from other sources. So this hopefully will give you a very good picture of the importance, the significance of this young gentleman. His early life, there isn't much information about his childhood or his adolescence. He was born on May 31st, 1872, in the small market town of Woking, Surrey, England, the youngest of 5 children. He was educated in ordinary state school. He did not go to university. So he had minimal education. He was of medium height, slender, erect, and graceful, with intense eyes and an indescribable charm. In fact, there's nothing written that I can find on the mother of Thomas Brakewell, but the father was a domestic ironware manufacturer and was an herbalist who had joined the Primitive Methodist Church and held evangelical meetings in his family home. So Thomas was exposed to religious teachings right in his own home as being part of a Primitive Methodist family. Now, what is Primitive Methodist Church? It was founded by John Wesley in 1807. It is one of 3 streams of the Methodist Church or Methodist faith existing in England at the time. It recognized the Christian sacraments of baptism, Holy Communion, matrimony, and other rites, but focused on restoring a spirit of revivalism and evangelicalism into the Methodist Church. It spread to the United States, to Australia, to Spain, and Guatemala. And in 1972, John Wesley's denomination of Methodist Church was blended with the United Methodist Church of Great Britain. So what you see a lot of in this country, and you will see in other countries, is the final version of the Methodist Church, the United Methodist Church, in your local communities. So he was exposed to religion right from the start. His parents were very strict, making sure that he attended every meeting and that he was well trained in the Methodist religion. At the bottom here is a picture of Woking, England, around the turn of the century. So it's pretty much what the town looked like, market town. His father is in the middle, Mr. Edward Breakwell, and of course Thomas is on the right. At a young age, he left England. He left his parents behind and he immigrated to the United States in May 1889, arriving in New York City, looking for work. He lived in Chicago 2 years and then moved to New Orleans around the time of a great general strike throughout the city, a tremendous hurricane called the Cheniere Caminada hurricane, and then followed by a great blizzard of 1899. He was employed as a stenographer for a company called Flour King and Putnam, a cotton mill in downtown New Orleans. His employment depended on the trade of cotton and child labor in the textile mills of the time, for which he felt great sorrow as to the conditions of the children that were being employed. His position allowed him enough income and vacation time to visit his family in England and travel throughout Europe. With regard to the child labor at the time, this continued throughout American history, not just in New Orleans, but throughout the South and even in the North for quite a few years. There were several movements that took place. The National Consumers League in 1899 launched a white label campaign in the women's garment industry to have every garment labeled to certify that goods were produced following minimum fair labor standards and were free of child labor, just as an example. There were other movements that took place. And finally, in 1938, the Fair Labor Standards Act was passed by Congress, which primarily focused on occupational health and safety for children, fair wages, minimum wages, equal pay for equal work, children getting the same pay as adults. But it didn't completely end child labor. Child labor continued. As a matter of fact, as late as the Obama administration, when the agriculture industry tried to put pressure on the White House to prevent the Department of Labor from imposing some age restrictions on labor in certain child labor in certain industries. So it's still a pervading issue in this country, in developed countries, and especially in undeveloped countries. But he saw it firsthand every day going to work for Flour King and Putnam. He was an open-minded gentleman attracted to different religious ideas. Obviously, the Methodist Church wasn't an appealing nature to him, and he was seeking the truth. He was seeking religious truth. And he was exposed to the Theosophical Society and to Hermetics. The Theosophical Society was founded in 1875 in the US. It was very much in vogue among the British and Indian seekers at the time. The society showed interest in the occult, the esoteric, the mystical universe with its particular Oriental approaches. Excuse me. As a matter of fact, Abdul Baha visited the Theosophical Society in Paris when he visited France in 1911, 1912. And then Hermetics. This is a very interesting philosophical system. It's not a religious system. It's one of the oldest non-Christian belief systems, founded by Hermes Trismegistus, contained in a book which may sound familiar to you, the Kabbalah, or the Kabbalion. The Kabbalah, by the way, you may have heard it as being the book that singer Madonna follows. She's not into religion, she's into ethics and philosophy, and she's a follower of the Kabbalah. But here are some of the teachings of the Kabbalah, which are mystical in themselves. It has 7 principles, like the ways of Buddha, only non-religious, mentalism, intuition. We have a living mind, which is connected to all living minds in the universe. All are aligned, all minds are aligned. Correspondence or meditation and yoga. There are constant links between mental, physical, and spiritual states in man. Vibration, everything in the universe has a vibration. High energy attracts high energy people. Polarity, everything has a dual nature, sadness and happiness. And we should reflect on what doesn't work, which will help us to appreciate what does work and improve on it. Rhythm, the right time and the wrong time. There's a right time for doing things and a wrong time for doing things. Cause and effect, there's no such thing as pure luck. That we should focus on being the cause and not focus on the effects. And then gender, masculine and feminine, and that each have different natures, and they're inherent in each human being, whether it's male or female. Each person's got a male aspect and a female aspect. The male aspect being assertive, penetrating, transformative. The feminine aspect being reflective, protective, nourishing. And there are 2 different forms of energy that come into play at different times in our lives and should be appreciated. Those are the 7 principles of the Hermetic philosophy. This is what he was experiencing as a young man in New Orleans. Accounts show that he definitely had an interest in theosophy. In 1894 was the year of new activity of theosophy in New Orleans. In February, NOVA Baha'i came to town, followed by Constance Wachtmeister. And on the 1st of May, an association was formed in New Orleans for the Theosophical Society, which began to hold meetings and advertise. And there's every evidence that Thomas Brakewell attended those meetings. In fact, he reported that there was a 3-month period, 90 days, when I felt, in quotes, I was continually in communion with God. So he was already mystically connected even before he discovered the Baha'i Faith. In 1898, Brakewell received U.S. citizenship. He became a U.S. citizen, no doubt a dual citizenship with England, the same day that his boss, Flower of Flower, King and Putnam, became the mayor of New Orleans. In 1899, he changed jobs, then being employed by W.C. Craig and Company, still working in the main trade of the era of cotton as a bookkeeper. So that's his young experience in the United States. Then he left the United States, no doubt to go on vacation and to meet up with his parents. He left the US on 29 March and spent some time living in England, probably with his parents, from 2 June through July 28, 1901. This is turn of the century. In very late July, he was on a boat headed for France, still vacationing, and encountered a Mrs. Milner on the boat. They had a conversation, and he shared with Mrs. Milner that he was interested in spiritual topics. I'm going to sip some water. Give me 1 second here. She was delighted to hear what he was interested in, and she introduced him to May Ellis Bowles, who was living in Paris, later to become May Maxwell, married to William Sutherland Maxwell of Canada, and a hand of the cause of God under the faith. She was a young teacher of the Baha'i Faith in Paris, working to establish the faith in the city. At that time, they only had 25 to 30 believers. And May was among the first group of Westerners to visit Abdul Baha in the Holy Land in 1898, along with Phoebe Hearst and Louis Getzinger and others. She was the angelic singer in the first visit by Westerners to the resting place of Baha'u'llah. That summer, Abdul Baha, oddly enough, this was before she met Thomas Brakewell, Abdul Baha asked May not to leave Paris. This was a very unusual situation because she was living with her mother and brother in Paris, and the mother decided to sell the home and to move her home to Brittany in France and to visit the people of Brittany. So she was in a position of not having a home to go to in Paris because of her mother's departure. But Abdul had told her, you cannot leave Paris. So she took up residence with a friend by the name of Edith Jackson. So when Thomas Brakewell went to visit May Bowles at the suggestion of Mrs. Milner, he visited May in Edith Jackson's home. And of course, May welcomed him as though he were a friend. May mentioned in her account that she said nothing to him about the faith in the first meeting. She could tell that Thomas was studying her, scrutinizing her for what spiritual secrets she knew. They discussed other ideas and Thomas's plans for the summer. It was after the first meeting with May that Thomas Brakewell returned to her the next day, describing a religious experience. And this is a quote. When I was here yesterday, he says to me, I felt a power and influence that I had felt once before in my life, probably those 90 days when he was attending the Theosophical Society meetings, when for a period of 3 months, I was continually in communion with God. I felt during that time like one moving in a rarefied atmosphere of light and beauty. My heart was on fire with love for the Supreme Beloved. I felt at peace, at one with all my fellow men. Yesterday, when I left you, I went alone down the Champs-Élysées. The air was warm and heavy, not a leaf was stirring, when suddenly a wind struck me and whirled around me. And in that wind, a voice said, with an indescribable sweetness and penetration, Christ has come again. Christ has come again. He asked her if he was going insane, and she assured him he was not. In fact, she said the exact opposite, that in fact, you are now becoming sane, and told him of the Bab and Baha'u'llah. The recognition of truth was for Thomas instantaneous, and without reservation. And for the following 3 days, he read everything Baha'i in May's possession. When she recounted the details of her pilgrimage to Akka, the prior years, to see Abdul Baha, Thomas immediately dropped all of his vacation plans and adopted one goal: to see Abdul Baha. He became the first Englishman to become a Baha'i. This is the first Englishman. He cabled these simple words to Abdul Baha to express his acceptance of the faith. My Lord, I believe, forgive me, thy servant, Thomas Breakwell. So he received word from Akka that he had permission to visit and set out. And oddly enough, May received word from Abdul Baha that she could now leave Paris. This is very interesting. Thus, she was able to rejoin her mother and brother in Brittany, having completed her mission, a mission of which she had no previous knowledge, the induction of a rare soul, Thomas Brakewell, into the faith of Baha'u'llah. Isn't this interesting? That Abdul Baha told her to stay in Paris, and obviously for one reason, to introduce Thomas to the faith so he could visit Abdul Baha and then do great things with the knowledge he gained in Akka. When Thomas and a companion, also a new believer, Herbert Hopper, arrived in Akka, they were ushered into a spacious room at one end of which stood a group of men in Oriental clothing. Herbert Hopper, by the way, was so moved by everything he was seeing, he was already lit and connected to the faith, even without seeing Abdul Baha. Brakewell suddenly felt ill and weak, thinking that he had failed to recognize Abdul Baha from the crowd. His mind buzzed with confusion. Why had he come here? Why had he given up the vacation to come to a remote prison seeking whatever? He became desperate and depressed. Suddenly a door opened up, and in the opening he saw what seemed to him a rising sun. So intensely brilliant was this light that he sprang to his feet and saw approaching him from out of this light the figure of Abdul Baha, who's pictured up in the right corner. On the left is a scene of Akka, and of course at the time Abdul Baha was living in the house of Abdullah Pasha, still a prisoner of the Ottoman Empire. Thomas did not have a chance to meet all of the Baha'i friends in Akka. At the time, the rules were, according to the authorities, that your visits were restricted to 2 days per visit. I believe right now it's 5 days per visit. I've had like 3 visits to Haifa, and I believe there were 5 days, but at the time it was only 2 days. His 2 days in Akka were spent wrapped in Abdul Baha's loving care and attention. Brakewell literally burned away with love when he informed Abdul Baha that the cotton mills he worked in used young children as workers. Abdul Baha looked at him and sadly said, "Cable your resignation." Now this is his livelihood, right? Abdul Baha is telling him, "Quit your job, cable your resignation." And Brakewell immediately obeyed, and doing so severed all ties with his old life. May's account says that Thomas obeyed Abdul Baha at once. With one stroke, he had cut all ties to his former life and was relieved of his crushing burden. This young man, this new believer, not only gave up his livelihood and reduced his standard of living, but his entire purpose of life changed. He now had only one desire: to please the master. Although only moments earlier he had felt weak and full of doubt, he was now completely transformed. Now, the words of Dr. Yunus Khan Afrukti, who was Abdul Baha's secretary who met Thomas on the visit. This is in 2 days. Dr. Yunus Khan talked with Breakwell. He says the effect of Abdul Baha on Thomas was related to his own personality and the degree of his own spiritual development. Although his stay in Akka was short, Thomas made a lasting impression. The fervor and the faith of this young man were so sublime in character that the blessed name of Brakewell shall ring throughout the centuries and shall be remembered with deep affection in many chronicles. Verses from the Gospels, which attest to the glories of the kingdom, were always on his lips. His sojourn in Akka was too short, but so intense was his love and so ardent his zeal that he touched the depths of the hearts of those who heard him. Whenever he was in the presence of our peerless master, Abdul Baha, he was wrapped in wonderment. At the top of the page, of course, is Abdul Baha sitting at the home of Abdullah Pasha, and a picture of the inner court of the home of Abdullah Pasha on the left. The master then asked Yunus Khan to accompany Thomas to Haifa, from where he was to ship back to Paris and to England, his planned destinations. Yunus Khan spent a few hours with Thomas at the home of one of the believers before the departure. He testifies to the young pilgrim's devotion. He says, "We were in a room that looked towards Akka. There he would stand every now and then, perfectly still, facing Akka in a state of communion. Whilst his eyes welled with tears, his tongue uttered words of supplication. All those who were there were greatly moved in the ecstatic state." Thomas asked Yunus Khan if he could correspond with Abdul Baha through Yunus Khan. Of course, Yunus Khan accepted that. Thomas expressed the desire that his letters would bring to him the fragrances of the effulgent city of Akka. From then on, the correspondence with Yunus Khan would be the vital link that united the young Englishman with his beloved master. All those who were present wept at the time it came to bid farewell to this devoted young pilgrim who had made such a lasting impression. And Thomas followed his master's bidding and returned to Paris. When the moment of departure finally arrived, Abdul Baha asked him to settle permanently in Paris and not to travel beyond it. The emotion of the occasion was intense. Brakewell left the Holy Land without knowing that he would never again see his beloved master. But his soul had been so deeply touched by Abdul Baha's divine love, it would have lasted the longest lifetime. He moved back to Paris. You can see the pictures of Paris at the top. Thomas lost no time as soon as he arrived in Paris, sharing with others the wonderful spirit which the master had released within him. The firmness of his faith was so apparent to all, as was a sincere wish to serve the cause and obey the covenant. May writes to him in the following terms: "Those days in the prison of Akka, when the master's all-consuming love and perfect wisdom had produced that mystic change of heart and soul which enabled him to rapidly free himself from all earthly entanglement and to passionately attach himself to the world of reality, brought great fruits to the faith. Although he had been used to living fairly comfortably, Thomas now completely changed his way of life. He returned to his studies. He went to live in an inexpensive neighborhood at number 14 Rue Leone, working as a stenographer in Paris. Although Thomas lived a long way from the city center, he used always to go on foot to the Baha'i meetings in order to save his fare and make his contribution to the teaching work in Paris. He was the first Baha'i, this is an important fact, not only the first Englishman who became a Baha'i, he was the first Baha'i in the West to pay Hu Allah, the right of God. So he set the example for all of us. No care for the future ever oppressed his mind. He had but one concern, to serve humanity until his last breath. So abandoned was he to the creative forces latent in the revelation of Baha'u'llah that he was moved spontaneously in the smallest actions of his day, his daily life, to pour out that spirit of love and oneness to all. As a matter of fact, there's a story that May tells of the two of them being on a bus, one of these double-decker buses with the top being open to the air like a British double-decker bus. And they're moving along in the bus, and Thomas Brakewell sees an elderly woman pushing a cart and trying to get the cart over a hill in the city. He immediately asks the bus driver to stop the bus. He gets off the bus, runs to the woman, and helps her lift that cart over the hill, and then returns to the bus. And this is just one small example of what his life was like, constantly doing for people, recognizing their needs, and trying to help them as much as he could. This is, by the way, a picture of the Baha'is of Paris at the time. In the middle, at the bottom, the two gentlemen at the bottom seated. On the right is Thomas Brakewell, and to his left is May Bowles, his teacher, his Baha'i teacher. At the top, on the left side, the fourth person on the left, the baldish person, is Hippolyte Dreyfus Barney, who visited Thomas Brakewell when he later got sick, and became a translator of some of the Baha'i writings, the original text of Baha'i writings, and married the woman next to him, who is Laura Clifford Barney. In fact, Hippolyte took on the Barney name, Hippolyte Dreyfus Barney. And the two of them became very strong members of the faith in constant communication with Akka and Abdul. This is May's account of the remaining days that Thomas Brakewell had in Paris. In the meetings, he spoke with a simplicity and eloquence which won the hearts and quickened the souls, and the secret of his potent influence lay in the supreme recognition of the manifestation of God, Baha'u'llah, and in the Bab, both Bab and Baha'u'llah, and of the sublime center of the covenant, Abdul. The potential which from their first meeting May had seen in this young man was now manifest in its full splendor. The effects which the spiritual growth produced were then so remarkable that May went so far as to comment, he had become the guiding star of our group. His calmness and strength, his intense fervor, his immediate and all-penetrating grasp of the vast import to mankind in this age of the revelation of Baha'u'llah, released among us forces which constituted a new epoch in the cause in France. These words were especially poignant when one thinks of Thomas's young age, of the influence he demonstrated, for truly he was unlike anyone else. The spiritual maturity he evinced was that of a much older person. May's account reports that he seemed to have no care for the future, burning like a white light in the darkness of Paris, serving his fellow men with a power and passion to the last breath of his life. The oneness of mankind had penetrated his soul like an essence, taking on every form of human relationship, imbuing him with an insight and penetration into human needs, an intense sympathy and genuine love, which made him a hope and refuge to all. He knew well the secret of imparting happiness. Those afflicted with sorrow and difficulties, beset with human problems, were drawn to him like a magnet and left him with shining eyes and uplifted heads. This is the Baha'i that he became in Paris after visiting Abdul Baha. Again, pictures of Paris, downtown Paris. Of course, the Eiffel Tower on the right in the upper portions of the slides. He started writing to Abdul Baha through Yunus Khan, his regular correspondence, which Yunus Khan shared regularly with Abdul Baha. He would inform Abdul Baha of Thomas's situation and of his desire to go to the master, to do the master's will. In one of the letters, Thomas asked whether the master would permit him to leave Paris for a few days just to check up on his parents. And in the event that his parents become ill or die, he wanted to be with his parents for their last days. Dr. Khan read the message to Abdul Baha, who smiled and told him to reply that today the living must bury the dead. So he was giving Thomas permission to return to England when he had to return, hoping that, of course, Thomas would remain in Paris. In one of Thomas's letters to Akka, he said that he now understood what he must do, but was still hoping to please the master more, to suffer more for his beloved. No one yet knew what this suffering was of which he spoke. Matters became more complex when Thomas's parents arrived in Paris, seeking to persuade him to return to England to convalesce from an incredibly poor health that was arising in his life. But Thomas steadfastly refused to leave Paris, and he wanted to fulfill the words of Abdul Baha by remaining there, continuing the faith, teaching of the faith. He asked Abdul Baha to pray for his parents so they might become Baha'is. Here's an interesting thing. The master replied that Thomas should not worry over that matter. And 2 weeks later, just 2 weeks later, Thomas informed Abdul Baha that his father, who had previously disowned him for rejecting primitive Methodism, had embraced the Baha'i Faith. Edward Breakwell even went so far as to write his own letter of supplication to the master, and Abdul Baha revealed a tablet in his honor. That's an interesting occurrence. He left it to Abdul Baha to influence his parents, and Abdul Baha fulfilled that mission, that request. Thomas wrote to the master happily saying that if he were Persian, he would have chosen to be a martyr. He had been admitted to a hospital and was in the state of tuberculosis, in a tuberculosis ward in a very poor part of Paris, still at a very young age. And tuberculosis, by the way, is something that affects the lungs. It's transmitted person to person, and very much like COVID, is transmitted through droplets of the tuberculosis bacteria that is emitted in the air and causes the problems in other people. But it became worse and worse. But the news from the young man continued to reach Akka, conveying an ever-increasing joy despite his suffering. Remember, he had asked Abdul Baha to allow him to suffer more. He didn't ask Abdul Baha to cure him. He asked for more suffering as he continued to teach the faith. Sometimes when Dr. Khan read Thomas's letters to Abdul Baha, the master would remain silent. Dr. Khan knew that the mysterious communion between the lover and the beloved had no need of the spoken word. Obviously, Thomas Brakewell had a tremendous effect on Abdul Baha and vice versa. There was a mystic connection there between the two. At other times, the master would ask his secretary simply to convey his greetings. Although Thomas could have asked for healing, he never did, but prayed always for greater suffering. The more his illness consumed him, the greater his joy became. Now, Hippolyte Dreyfus, whom I mentioned, was able to visit Thomas. He was a French Baha'i, later married to Laura Clifford Barney. He was able to visit Thomas in the hospital and relates how the young Englishman spoke to the other patients enthusiastically about the Baha'i faith, even though he was suffering from this serious disease. Some were upset by the message, others criticized it, but Thomas was unperturbed. He maintained his tranquility. He told them that he was not going to die, but he was merely departing for the kingdom of God and that he would pray for them in heaven. Writing of his pain, he said, "Suffering is a heady wine. I am prepared to receive that bounty, which is the greatest of all. Torments of the flesh have enabled me to draw much nearer to my Lord. All agony notwithstanding, I wish life to endure till longer, so that I may taste more of the pain. That which I desire is the good pleasure of my Lord. Mention me in his presence." The rest of Thomas Brakewell's life was brief and metaphoric. He is filled with love for his new faith and the world. He returned to Paris, lived in a spiritual state, a teacher of the Baha'i Faith. Most of the days that it remained to him, he lived in poverty. Within a year of becoming a Baha'i, 1 year of becoming a Baha'i, he had contracted tuberculosis in Paris, and he was hospitalized, still teaching the faith to his fellow patients. He breathed his last breath on June 13th, 1902, at the age of 30, only 1 year as a Baha'i. This is a very special person. 30 years old, 1 year as a Baha'i, passing to the Abdul kingdom. Without having received any written word, Abdul Baha knew of Thomas's passing and revealed with streaming tears a tablet of visitation to his resting place. This tablet concludes with these heart-wrenching words: "O Brakewell, O my dear one, at all times do I call thee to mind. I shall never forget thee. I pray for thee by day, by night. I see thee plain before me as if in open day. O Brakewell, O my dear one." Abdul Baha described him as a lamp amid the angels of high heaven, and saw something in him that he wanted us to know about Thomas's station, which is more clearly captured in the Arabic version of the tablet. Now, Lakshman Lepin's book says that there was translation of the tablet of visitation into English and French, but they do not match the importance of the Arabic original tablet of visitation, which really describes the high station of Thomas Brakewell very well. In this last chapter of the book, Lepin says that the life of Thomas Brakewell was very much like the seven valleys, going through the journey of his seven valleys: the valley of search, love, knowledge, unity, contentment, wonderment, true poverty, absolute nothingness. And he quotes Baha'u'llah as saying, "The true believer hath attained the knowledge of the station of him who is at the distance of two vowels, who standeth beyond the Sadratul Muntaha, the point which marks the inaccessibility of God." And that's the station that Lepin attaches, based upon Abdul Baha's visitation tablet, to Thomas Brakewell, that he has ascended into direct view and communication with the Creator. He's held that high station. As a matter of fact, I want to read from the book because it uses the words, it says, bear with me. It says that we may describe the spiritual journey of Thomas Brakewell as having left the world of Nasut, the plane of the human condition, to rise, first of all, in the world of Malakut, the world of the soul, and by special grace, reach the world of Lahut, the world of divinity, where he attained the sacred threshold of the Lord of Jabarut. So he had directly attained the presence of his Creator. That's the high station to which Abdul Baha acknowledges him. We're going to look at the actual English translation of the tablet of visitation, and I point out in the purple highlighting the words that support that conclusion, the high station of Thomas Brakewell. He says, "Grieve thou not over the ascension of my beloved Breakwell, for he hath risen unto a rose garden of splendors within the Baha'i paradise." Let that image of garden and roses stick in the back of your minds, because it will come into play later. Sheltered by the mercy of his mighty Lord, and he is crying at the top of his voice. This is Thomas crying, "Oh, that my people could know how graciously my Lord hath forgiven me, and made me to be of those who have attained his presence." Reading on, it says, "Breakwell, thou hast quit this earthly world and risen upward to the kingdom. Thou hast reached unto the grace of the invisible realm and offered thyself at the threshold of its Lord." Later he says, "Thou hast lit a flame within the lamp of the company on high. Thou hast set foot in the Baha'i paradise. Thou hast found a shelter in the shadow of the blessed tree. Thou hast attained his meeting in the haven of heaven. Thou hast risen to the station filled with light. Thy song is even as a bird's song now. Thou pourest forth verses as to the mercy of thy Lord. Of him who forgiveth forever, thou wert a thankful servant. Wherefore hast thou entered into exceeding bliss. O Brakewell, O my dear one, the Lord hath verily singled thee out for his love, hath led thee into his precincts of holiness, had made thee to enter the garden of those who are his close companions, hath blessed thee with beholding his beauty. Thou art become a star in the supernal sky, a lamp amid the angels of high heaven, a living spirit in the most exalted kingdom, throned in eternity. I ask of God to draw thee ever closer, hold thee ever faster, to rejoice thy heart with nearness to his presence, to fill thee with light and still more light, to grant thee still more beauty, and to bestow upon thee power and great glory. I pray for thee by day, by night. I see thee plain before me as if in open day. O Brakewell, O my dear one." Clearly, Brakewell had an effect on Abdul Baha and vice versa. The mysterious nature of the unspoken communion between the lover and the beloved can be seen in the way in which Yunus Khan learned of Thomas's death. This is a very interesting story. I mentioned to you that Abdul Baha knew of Thomas Brakewell's passing without receiving any letters or communications. This is according to Yunus Khan. "I was accompanying the master in the evening from the house where he received his visitor to his home by the seaside. All of a sudden, he turned to me and said, 'Have you heard?' 'No, master,' I replied. And he said, 'Brakewell has passed away.' I am grieved, very grieved. I have revealed a prayer of visitation for him. It is a very moving prayer, so moving that twice I could not withhold my tears when I was writing it. You must translate it well, so that whoever reads it will weep. I never knew who had given the master the news of Brakewell's death. It wasn't him. It wasn't Yunus Khan. If anyone had written or cabled either in English or in French, that communication would have passed through my hands. 2 days later, the prayer of visitation was given to me. It wrung one's heart, and I could not hold back my tears. I translated it into French, and later, with the help of Louis Getzinger, into English. Yunus Khan recounts the following story regarding the master's continuing attachment, even after the passing, to Thomas. Abdul Baha called me one day to his presence to give me letters to translate. There were many envelopes sent from various places. While examining them, still sealed, he all of a sudden picked out one and said, "How pleasing is the fragrance from this letter that emanates from this envelope. Make haste, open it and see where it comes from. Make haste." In it, there was a postcard. The postcard was colored a beautiful shade, and attached to it was a solitary flower of violet. So where could this letter have come from? Written in letters of gold were these words: "He is not dead. He lives on in the kingdom of God." Further, there was this sentence: "This flower was picked from Brakewell's grave." When I told the master what the message of the postcard was, he at once rose up from his seat, took the card, put it on his blessed brow, and tears flowed down his cheeks. In a letter enclosed with the card, Edward Brakewell wrote, "Praise be to the Lord that my son left this world for the next with the recognition and love of Abdul Baha." This is the same Brakewell who had disowned his son for leaving the Methodist Church, and with the help of Abdul Baha, embraced the faith himself. Very interesting story. Thomas Brakewell passed away. He was buried in a mass grave in the Pantene Cemetery, which was leased for a 5-year period, after which time, as no survivors kept up the payments on the plot, his bones were disinterred, cleaned, bundled, and numbered, and it was kept, as is custom, in the cemetery's charnel house. The section where Brakewell's bones were stacked has long since been sealed, and other sections built against it, which in turn have been filled. So the bones were not in the grave for some time, and I've been able to find nothing which confirms that the bones were restored to the gravesite. Since that time when Thomas's bones were removed, 2 other people have been buried in this very gravesite. When it became known to the Baha'is in Paris that the gravesite was once again vacant, the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of France sought to erect a permanent monument to Thomas on the site. Cemetery officials at Pantene were reluctant to give approval for an elaborate monument, and the National Spiritual Assembly had to settle for a simple but dignified stone. The stone was laid in 1997. The site has become a focal point of pilgrimage. The Universal House of Justice at that time, and perhaps continuing, unless somebody could tell me differently, had encouraged the French Baha'i community to continue its efforts to retrieve Brakewell's remains from the charnel house and have them returned to the original gravesite where the stone was laid. So what happens after the death of Thomas Brakewell? We know from Baha'i history that Abdul Baha actually visited Paris in 1911, 1912, and I believe he returned again in 1913. This is a picture of Abdul Baha with his entourage in front of the Eiffel Tower, and on the right is a picture of Abdul Baha with the Baha'is of Paris. Now, here's an interesting fact. I read through Paris Talks, a book that documents the speeches that Abdul Baha gave in Paris when he was there, and could not find either a mention of Brakewell or a reference to Brakewell. And I thought to myself, it's rather strange that he's visiting the home of his beloved Brakewell, but never mentions Brakewell in any of the talks he gives in Paris. But he did say this, and this is one of the last speeches he gave in 1911, in December of 1911, before moving on to other parts of France. He says, "When I arrived in Paris some time ago for the first time, I looked around me with such interest, and in my mind, I likened this beautiful city to a large garden." Again, the garden image. "With loving care and much thought, I examined the soil, and I found it to be very good and full of possibility for steadfast and firm belief, for a seed of God's love has been cast into the ground." Now, who do you think he was referring to when he talked about the seed of God's love had been cast into the ground? I believe it was Thomas Brakewell. And he says, "Paris will become a garden of roses. All kinds of beautiful flowers will spring up and flourish in this garden, and the fame of their fragrance and beauty will be spread in all lands." Again, that was Abdul Baha, Paris Talks, the 1st of December, 2011. On the right is a picture of the Baha'is of France at the Eiffel Tower. This is a contemporary picture of the Baha'is in France at the Eiffel Tower. Remember, back when May Bowles was an active teacher, there were only 25 to 30. So you could see how it grew over the years. What is his legacy? What is Thomas Brakewell's legacy? In 1955, Shoghi Effendi referred to Brakewell as one of the three luminaries of the British, Irish, and Scottish Baha'i communities, with George Townsend pictured on the left, and John Ebenezer Esselmont pictured on the right. George Townsend is the first Irish Baha'i, and John Ebenezer Esselmont is the first Scottish Baha'i. So Shoghi Effendi elevated Thomas Brakewell, the first English Baha'i, to the station of three luminaries of the British Isles: Brakewell, Townsend, and Esselmont. And Townsend was the canon of the Cathedral of St. Patrick's in Dublin. He was a religious cleric who, by the way, spent time teaching English at the University of the South in the United States for some time before he returned to Ireland and became a canon. He later left the faith, wrote a very long letter to the clerics of the Anglican Church in the British Isles, sharing the news of his newfound faith, the Baha'i faith, and then divorcing himself from his old faith and becoming a Baha'i teacher and a translator of the writings of the faith. John Ebenezer Esselmont is the author of Baha'u'llah, the New Era. George Townsend wrote several books, Christ and Baha'u'llah and The Promise of All Ages. So they became authors in their own right and assistants to Shoghi Effendi. John Esselmont was a student in England with Shoghi Effendi and a friend of Shoghi Effendi. So Brakewell was instantly elevated to this station of sharing the luminary post with these three figures, the other two figures. In the 1980s, a nationwide system of Baha'i Sunday schools was instituted and named in honor of Thomas Brakewell. This was followed by the establishment of Thomas Brakewell College, which, by the way, I looked for it. I don't believe it still exists. It was a distance learning program intended to provide moral and spiritual education to a new generation of young people all over the world. An expanding number of institutes, programs, and activities seeking to honor his life and fostering his remembrance arose. In 1987, Hand of the Cause Ruhiya Hanum, the wife of Shoghi Effendi, and Hand of the Cause herself, commemorated her mother's time in France with a trip, visiting Baha'is in 17 places over 33 days in France, which included a 2-day national conference on spreading the religion held in Paris, and 7 regional gatherings throughout the country and a national youth conference. You can see at the lower left, May Bowles, then May Maxwell, holding the baby, Mary Maxwell, who later became Ruhiya Hanum, wife of Shoghi Effendi. On the right. So we talked about the burial of Thomas Brakewell, the situation of being buried and then bones disinterred, kept in the charnel house, the grave being vacated, the stone being laid at the request of the National Spiritual Assembly and the Universal House at the spot of the old gravesite. And here we are with that stone and the visitors on a pilgrimage to the site of the stone reflecting the gravesite of Thomas Brakewell. What we don't know is whether the bones that were in the charnel house were in fact restored to this gravesite. They may still be there. I've searched everywhere, could not find any news of it. Perhaps a Baha'i from France, if anybody knows any, can answer that question, if that ever occurred. But on June 14th, 1997, 95 years to the day since the remains of Brakewell were laid to rest, a diverse group of Baha'is representing the inheritors of that glorious legacy of the faith which Thomas left to the world gathered at the Pantin Cemetery in Paris to honor his memory at the dedication of the newly erected memorial and to participate in the celebration of Thomas's life and legacy. You could see parts of the tablet of visitation on the stone itself. The old Breakwell quotes from Abdul Baha on the gravestone. This is a picture of contemporary Baha'is celebrating the 200th anniversary of the birth of Baha'u'llah, and the center, the Baha'i Center in downtown Paris. You can see, for those of you who are involved in the climate control and the environment, that the Baha'is of Paris are equally involved in environmental concerns and projects, having picked up trash in Paris, the lower right picture, and the Baha'is congregated in the upper right, and again on the lower left. So these are contemporary Baha'is. These are my references. I primarily used Rajwanti Lakshman Lepin's book, Life of Thomas Brakewell, which was published in 1998 by the Baha'i Publishing Trust of London. I also used Janet Roux-Schoen's book, and of course the account, May Maxwell's account, which is available online, and other secondary sources to add to Lepin's references. So you could check these out. There's a lot of material online. Some questions which I ask you, and you could answer them, and just blurt out. I don't see your faces, I only see the open screen. Blurt out what you think might be some of the answers to these questions. And if you have any questions, this is the time to raise them. What were the pivotal events in Thomas's life which propelled him to a spiritual mission? Anyone?
When
Well, we know from the start.
When he met in the boat, he met was it Lua Getzinger, or am I saying it wrong?
No. He met, now I'm forgetting her name. Mrs. M was a Baha'i who introduced him to May Bowles. Yes, he met the young lady on the boat and had the opportunity to share his spiritual views with the young lady. Yes, that is one of the events. But even before that, being exposed to religion right in the home of his parents, who held evangelical meetings of the Methodist Church right in the home. He was exposed to spiritual things. His life in the United States, attending Theosophical Society meetings and being exposed to Hermetics and Hermeticism and the Kabbalah. So he was already prepared spiritually even before he met Mrs. M, and he met May Bowles, and he met Abdul Baha. All of these very important events in his life. And of course, meeting Abdul Baha was the most important event, which converted him really to the Baha'i Faith. What qualities did he exude which prepared him for the last year of his life? Clearly, he was selfless, especially toward the end of his life, caring for more suffering, requesting more suffering instead of a cure to his illness, so that with more suffering, he can get closer and closer to his creator. He cared not for the things of the world. It was spiritual. He had a spiritual mission and he was aiming to fulfill it. Go ahead.
And the example you gave of him stopping the bus to go help the elderly person, that was another example.
Right, and probably one of the most important events, at the request of Abdul Baha, just simply giving up his past life, giving up his livelihood. He was able to travel comfortably, working for the flour company in New Orleans, because he had enough income to be able to travel frequently. Now he was giving up that job and giving up his regular income and living in poverty, essentially, and dying in poverty, to fulfill his spiritual mission as a Baha'i in Paris. These are some of the qualities. His qualities were so perfected that he had a great effect on the people in Akka, great effect on the people of Paris, great effect on Abdul Baha. Why did Abdul Baha instruct May Bowles not to leave Paris? This should be an easy answer.
John, I have an interesting story about this, if you don't mind. I guess everybody knows the
Go
answer.
ahead, please.
It seems like as May Maxwell's mother and brother were leaving town, they were leaving Paris to go to Brittany. She writes to Abdul Baha saying that, I'm not sure why she's not coming with us. Can you please, convince her to go with us? And Abdul Baha replies directly back to May without replying to the mother, tells May Maxwell, do not leave Paris. And it's really fascinating that he didn't even reply, Abdul Baha didn't reply back to the mother, but replied directly to May herself. And the time that she spent there in 18 months, apparently, I was reading somewhere that she taught 30 Baha'is, and she actually, it was just amazing, the history of that city or anywhere.
Yeah, the news from to May's mother infuriated the mother, because she had big plans to have her son and daughter join her in Brittany. So she was angry. She was angry that she had to stay in Paris. But it's amazing that suddenly Abdul Baha changed his instructions after Thomas Breakwell became a Baha'i. It was after Thomas Breakwell decided to go to Akka to meet Abdul Baha that she gets this word from Abdul Baha that she's free to leave Paris. Very interesting. Clearly, her stay in Paris was intended to introduce Thomas Breakwell to the faith. And last but not least, what lessons and insights do we gain from Thomas's life and death, which we can now apply to our own lives? Our lives are much easier now. Sacrifice does not come readily for the Baha'is of the 21st century. Let's put it that way. The early Baha'is, they gave great sacrifices. They gave up everything for the faith. They obeyed immediately when they were instructed by Abdul Baha to do things. They gave up their material life. They gave up their incomes. They gave up their livelihoods. And they devoted themselves entirely to teaching the faith and spreading the faith wherever they ended and landed. And sometimes these were far away from the places they began from and where they were born.
So the lesson that you don't mind that in the Baha'i faith, it doesn't matter how long you've been a Baha'i, whether you're a lifelong Baha'i or you've been a Baha'i for a day. He was obviously just Baha'i for a year, and he was so dear to Abdul Baha and had such a station. It's just incredible.
It is amazing. It is absolutely amazing. I think that this Baha'i can do so much for the faith after only 1 year as a Baha'i. 1 year as a Baha'i, and dying at a very young age, and Abdul Baha raising him to such high station. What an amazing story, which is the reason why in reading this, I said, this is a story that must be told. Everyone must hear this story and read the book for themselves. It's only 80 pages. You should read the book if you haven't read it and be moved as I was moved when I read it.
I'll say one more thing. I've been very blessed to go to his gravesite in Paris, in that cemetery, about 15 years ago.
Oh, great. There's no doubt it must have been a moving experience to do that.
It really was. It wasn't that easy. We had to go to the Baha'i Center to get the map and directions to find the cemetery. It's outside of the city, but I was fascinated when I found out, when I read about his story, and I really wanted to go and visit his gravesite, and Neda and I did, and it was an incredible experience.
Now, there is a song, and I'm going to spare you. I'm not going to sing it myself. But there's a song that was recorded by Grant Hindon Miller, who has an interesting life all of his own. I happened to look it up. And he is a Baha'i from Auckland, New Zealand, who was a teacher for 7 years, a musician for 5 years, a probation counselor for a number of years, a freelance writer of children's books, and then turned to songwriting and recorded many of his songs, which you can find on YouTube, by the way. And I found this song on YouTube, which is the story of Thomas Breakwell. I'm going to stop this share and move to the YouTube site and share that with you.
He walked around Paris with his head in his hands, watching the river beside Notre Dame. He was looking for something, what he could not tell, but each time he looked round, he heard a sound. And there was a traveler he met on a boat, who said, I know someone you'll like a lot. And what did it matter? He had time on his hands from the moment he got there. He heard that sound. Breakwell, Carmel was calling you. Breakwell, your heart, it kept telling you, listen now. Can't you hear it, the sound of the nightingale? And the streets swelled with oranges and lemons of the bells of St. Ivy's and St. Clement's. He was floating halfway to the heavens. He broke well, and the sweet strains of Tehran and Avoca, they were bouncing on the rooftops of Montmartre. The last chains, so easily cast asunder, he broke well. He came back to Paris, an angel of light, like the leaves of the autumn. He was ready for flight, for he had seen something, a vision so high. When a bird finds its own wings, it just has to fly. Breakwell, Abha was calling you. Breakwell, your heart, it kept telling you, listen now. Can't you hear it, the sound of the nightingale. There you go, Thomas. A bientôt, Thomas. Godspeed your journey well.
I like to read the words of Lakshman Lepan. He says, Thomas Brakewell's name will never be forgotten. His true gift to us lies in the sacred vision that he realized in his brief life. The brightness and purity of his faith will continue to illuminate the hopes of many future generations. I hope you enjoyed this presentation, and I hope that in the future there'll be other presentations on the lives of, especially the early Baha'is that sacrificed so much and laid the foundation for Baha'i communities all over the world. Any thoughts, any questions about this presentation? I'd like to hear from everybody.
John, thank you very much. Very moving. Thank you.
Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, John. Really enjoyed it.
Thank
It
you.
was a fascinating story, John.
It's a beautiful story, really moving story. And you know what's interesting too is the connectedness of the early Baha'is. Hippolyte Dreyfus Barney, translating so many of the original texts of the Baha'i writings with his wife, connected to Brakewell. The first Scottish Baha'i, the first Irish Baha'i, connected by Shoghi Effendi with Brakewell. May Bowles, the mother of Rhea Hanum, connected to Brakewell. The connections are unbelievable. The life that was led, so moving and inspiring. I want to thank the Northern Virginia Baha'i Center, the local spiritual assembly of Loudoun, and especially the events committee for giving me this opportunity. I promise you that it will not be a long time before the next presentation. I want this to be a series. I want this to be quarterly or maybe once every 6 months until everybody's story is told. There's so many wonderful Baha'is, Julia Thompson, some of the Persian Baha'is, early Baha'is, their stories must be told. And I want to get around to telling those stories. So thank you again for giving me this opportunity.
John,
And
thank
I
you
hope
very
all of
much.
you.
It's really
Thank you.
appreciated. It's well researched, and we look forward to having you back. And if I may just make a small announcement, we have
Please.
these different series as the Baha'i Center has been close to big activities. So we've been doing everything online, and we're really hopeful to the day of perhaps maybe in a few months to be able to go back there, and maybe we'll continue to have live meetings and putting them on Zoom so we can have our beautiful friends in Pennsylvania and other states that, and I think you mentioned, Elizabeth, where did you move, you said, to? You're on mute, sorry.
Oh, I'm on mute?
No, Elizabeth Green.
I'm in
Elizabeth, sorry.
South Mississippi.
Mississippi,
coast.
wonderful.
Yes.
So,
we
and
make
from
Baha'i-
Florida and everywhere you can join us and enjoy these beautiful talks and see your friends. So we are having also cultural heritage series that we've had a few in the past. But I wanted to mention that we had a beautiful presentation from our own dear Marissa on the Baha'i holy places. I believe it was last month. but we failed to record it due to some technical problems, mainly being me. So we've decided to represent it in order to be able to record it. So on May 1st, we're going to do this again, and we're going to open it. I'm sorry, I've been talking and you haven't been able to hear me. I apologize.
No, we heard most of it. We heard most of it.
Okay, so basically, we're going to present this talk, and I just put the details on May 1st. I just put it in the chat. On May 1st at 7:30 p.m. If anyone is interested, we thought since we have to do it again anyways, we're gonna open it to everyone again if they like to join, if they missed the first one. And we're gonna record it this time and put it on the center YouTube and the link. So everyone is welcome. It was such a presentation and beautiful pictures and a good history. So if you like to join us on the 1st, and then if you like to receive all the advertisements for these workshops and series and the holy days that is done through the center, you can actually visit the NOVA Baha'i Center.org, the site, and then email the facility manager to be put on Northern Virginia announce. And once you add your email there, every month or whenever there's an event, you'll be informed. So thank you again, John.
I want to say thank you also to Marissa.
Presentation.
Thank you, Human. I wanted to thank you and Marissa for the introductions and the prayers, and Payman for setting it up, making sure that the word got out to everybody. I do want to tell you that the image behind me, which is a 9-pointed star surrounded by multiple 9-pointed stars. Let me move so you can see it. See it better. This is the image on the Facebook site of the Baha'is of France. So I think it was Elizabeth who asked me why the Baha'is of France. And I said, well, you'll have to listen to the presentation to make the connection. Obviously, Brakewell was in France, in Paris. And I borrowed this image from Facebook, which is beautiful. There's a lot of material on that Facebook site, so you might want to check it out. I did try to research the number of Baha'is, which is always difficult to find. Information about the number of Baha'is in Paris, the number of Baha'is in France. The only thing I could find was in 2005, it was reported that there were about 5,000 Baha'is in France. I have nothing about Paris, so I don't know how many are actually there. Hopefully, since 2005, the numbers have grown, but that's the size of the community as of 2005, 5,000 Baha'is. So thank you again for giving me this opportunity. I hope you all stay safe, in good health, and hopefully the Baha'i Center will be open to events that we could all attend in person in the future, and we'll all be able to congregate once again and share these histories and the programs that we used to. And thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We enjoyed it. It was
Thank
good
you.
to see everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining.
Bye-bye.
All the best.
Thank you, everyone.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Oh, thank you to my brother, Michael, who's on the call too, from
Yes.
Philadelphia. Thank you, Michael.
It's nice to see you.
Nice to see you, Michael.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.